Welcome to the Commentary Magazine Daily Podcast. Today is Thursday, September 5th, 2024. I'm John Podhoretz, the editor of Commentary Magazine. With me, as always, executive editor Abe Greenwald. Hi, Abe.
Hi, John.
Senior editor Seth Mandel. Hi, Seth.
Hi, John.
Washington commentary columnist Matthew Continetti. Hi, Matt.
Hi, John.
And joining us today is my honor to welcome the former U.S. ambassador to Israel and the author of the new book, One Jewish State, The Last Best Hope to Resolve the Israeli-Palestinian Conflict, David Friedman. Hi, David.
Hey, John. Thanks for having me.
You bet. So, David, I am also happy to report David will be one of the roasters at our 2024 commentary roast of Natan Sharansky, coming November 17th to a New York City hotel near you. Even if it's not near you, come to New York City to come to the hotel, to come to the roast, which you can find out about at commentary.org/roast. You may ask yourself, how in this 13th annual commentary roast, how on earth can you roast the greatest living Jewish hero? How can you make fun of Natan Sharansky? We are going to show you how, but you got to come to see. And one of the people you will see there is David Friedman. And David, let's just jump in with the current fight over the Philadelphia corridor and the hostage deal, so to speak. An interesting conversation yesterday with somebody you may know, my friend Peter Himmelman, the songwriter and writer, who mentioned to me that he believes that the use of the word deal in this conversation is a semantic infiltration of a kind, because we have one honest negotiating partner in Israel that is seeking to end a war and bring hostages home. And then we have another negotiating partner who is not a negotiating partner, who is not even in the negotiations as we understand them, who wants no deal, is simply looking for tactical, momentary advantage, and that therefore even the use of this term slants the conversation toward Hamas. Do you agree with Peter's observation?
I agree with it. Look, if there were a deal, well, first of all, how could you possibly make a deal with anybody who kills 1,200 people and kidnaps, rapes, abuses so many more? So the idea that you could ever make a deal, trust the other side to carry out their bargain, is a fool's errand. But on top of that, I don't think there's ever been a deal. I think Ron Dermer just said that last night. There's never been a deal that Israel has turned away from. I mean, it's pretty simple. I mean, ask Joe Biden, what's the deal? You know, how many hostages are being released? How many murderers with blood on their hands are being sent back into society? Who's going to run Philadelphia? Who's going to run Gaza? I mean, you know, no one knows the answer to these things because there's no deal. And if there had been a deal, it would have leaked, because these things leak all the time. So it is, I think, all politics on the part of the United States. They try to create this sense of progress and a deal. You know, Kamala Harris studied the maps, and Joe Biden is working day and night, you know, from his chair on the beach. It's just politics, just designed to give the impression to those people whose votes they want to court that they actually are engaged, when I don't think they've made any progress at all.
So there was, of course, a deal, right? There was a deal in November that led to the release of 80-some hostages. But I want to remind people what happened and why that deal closed 8 days after it started, which is that it was supposed to be ongoing. And the question was then going to be, when were they going to release the next set of hostages to be released after the ones who had come out were the young women. And then at the last moment, Hamas said, well, we don't know where they are. They're scattered around. We don't know where they are. We said we'd release them, but we won't release them. And then Netanyahu and Gallant and the government said, okay, well, the ceasefire is over. These were the terms. The ceasefire was to go on as long as hostages were being released. And now you're saying you can't release any more hostages. So we are going back to war. So there was a deal, and the deal was breached by Hamas. Like, Israel would have continued the ceasefire had the release happened. And of course, we know that at least 3 of those 6 hostages who were murdered this weekend would likely have been released as a result of the continuation of that first agreement to stop hostilities for the purpose of freeing the Israeli and non-Israeli hostages.
Well, look,
So
I think that Hamas panicked. This was early on. I don't think they anticipated the response from Israel, nor that the world would not come and stop Israel. And so I think they panicked and they said we got to do something to slow this down. And that was, that's why they acted when they realized that the war's going on. They haven't really achieved much by it. They hunkered down. So I mean, I think we're lucky. We were lucky that we got out the first round, but their goals are, there's nothing that Israel can do to achieve their goals. Can't leave Hamas in power. Can't continue the smuggling of weapons from Egypt into Gaza. Can't subject the people in Sderot and the periphery to this kind of rocket fire any longer. I mean, you have to get the people in the north back home. And Israel doesn't have much to do. They can release some prisoners, which, by the way, that's how this thing started in the first place, when they released 1,000 prisoners, including Yahya Sinwar, in exchange for Gilad Shalit. So I would say one thing. I mean, I don't want to monopolize this conversation, John, but the idea that there are two goals that are mutually inconsistent has always been, I think, a failed strategy, that you can either get the hostages out or win the war. I think the only way to get the hostages out is to win the war. And I think the more pressure Israel places on Hamas, the better the chance of getting them out. But at the same time, you've got people in Israel in deep trauma and pain who are just crying out for help. And I mean, God forbid I was in that situation, I'd probably do the same thing. But I think it's a false choice.
you were ambassador from 2017 to the beginning of 2021, or January 2021. So you dealt with every leading Israeli political figure. I can't remember, because my timeline is all askew, whether or not you were there when one of Bibi's many interim governments fell, and Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid came into power. Were you? And what was Bennett?
I was no, 4 years all Bibi.
Okay, but you know all the players, and you obviously it's a tiny country, and you know all the players. To what extent do you think that the there's this argument that's being made that Bibi's position, obviously always a far more moderate politician, or a far more cautious politician than people give him credit for being, because it's so much part of our propagandistic conversation to pretend otherwise. But that he would be more likely to agree to some kind of pause in the holding of the Philadelphia corridor between Gaza and Egypt, except that he's desperately and tenaciously clinging onto power, and that his government would fall should he agree to such a thing, because the two, Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, the two radicals in the government, will make it collapse, pull their 14 votes out, and he will be left in the lurch. And so therefore, knowing him, he would probably go along with Yoav Gallant, the defense minister, who says he wants the deal, but he can't because he's so hungry for power.
Yeah, look, I think in every political leader, there's a part of the calculation that is political. Every political leader lives to continue, but I don't think it's fair here that much, because look, I think he's right. Look, if Israel leaves the Philadelphia corridor, they're never going to be able to get back. I mean, the idea that they're going to leave and then come back in a few months is, without provoking a greater outcry from the world than they already have, I think is very naive. So, Bibi right now is suffering under the yoke of Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, because people have an easy argument. Oh, he's just doing this because of them. Well, he's also doing it because his party agrees. The Likud agrees as well. He's also doing it because probably 75% of Israelis agree as well. I mean, the Israelis have had it. They don't want to take any more risks in that area. They want this solved once and for all. And after discovering, the truck-wide tunnels between Gaza and Egypt that people really just didn't know were there. I mean, Israel has made a lot of errors here. But having discovered it, I mean, they're not going to just like walk away. I mean, it would be suicide. So, you know, Ben-Gvir and Smotrich are the whipping boys. It's really easy to blame them, but that's I don't think it's a fair criticism.
Okay, let's get to your book, One Jewish State, recently released by, I'm trying to read this. Hold on. Humanix Books.
Yeah, that's Newsmax.
So Newsmax. So you can go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever, order, buy David's argument. And this is a very unusual book from somebody. I know you're not a professional diplomat. You were a lawyer. God forbid. You were a successful lawyer for 35 years. And this is a task you took on because you knew the president and his son-in-law were looking for somebody they could trust to represent America's interests in a manner radically different from the manner that the State Department had been approaching this. And in your 4 years, and I think so, the book is very knowledgeable about the internal workings of the Israeli government and all of that. But you are making a very, very large argument here using the Bible, Western tradition, international law, and history to say that the future of Israel's security and the demands of Israel's history, and indeed the demands of Western history itself, and possibly, though you do not necessarily have to agree with this, and people listening to me are not necessarily believers as you and I are in this, the demands of the Almighty himself say that the land between the Jordan River, and maybe even beyond the Jordan River, we'll just stop at the Jordan River. The land between the Jordan River and the Mediterranean is the biblical land of Israel, and the restoration of the Jews to Zion is incomplete because, as you begin the book, many of the sites that we discuss every week, those of us who attend synagogue or people who are knowledgeable about the Bible or what you might call the Old Testament, the sites that represent what happened after Moses died on the promontory on the way into Israel, and then enter the land and set up the first altar, set up a king, set up a capital city in the city of Shiloh, and onward, tombs, burial sites, all of that actually exists not in what is now recognized as the land of Israel, but in what is called the West Bank. And that if we agree to the notion, as we do, that there is a historical connection to the land, the historical connection is incomplete and has not yet been fulfilled, because that is the part of the land is that land. Why is it called Judea? Because that's where the tribe of Judah, that was the kingdom of the tribe of Judah, and that's why it's there. So
that's why we're called Jews.
That's actually a really quite a beautiful section at the beginning of the book, is that you lay out when Israel becomes a nation and when they stop being the Hebrews or the Israelites and when they become the Jews. And this is a process that takes hundreds of years till we are identified as Jews. Obviously, this argument, though extraordinarily potent to me, is not the sort of thing that you bring to a negotiating table. Though you can bring it to the American people, you can bring it to you can bring it to the Israeli people, for that matter. How does that argument connect with the idea that the most secure Israeli future, and indeed the best future for the people that we call the Palestinians, would reside in a one Jewish state that extended from the river to the sea?
So, look, I mean, I think the faith arguments have always been there. What I argue is that now, post October 7th, just real politics and economics and national security, and the best outcome for all people, they've all converged, I think, to the same place, which is that Israel really needs to take over and have sovereignty over all of Judea and Samaria, or the West Bank, as the world refers to it. So here's an easy reason why. Look at the GDP per capita of Egypt. It's about $4,000 or $5,000. Jordan, about the same thing. West Bank, little less. Syria, Lebanon, $2,000 per capita. Gaza, zero. Israel, $55,000. So let's assume that the Palestinians can't self-govern, which I would argue is now demonstrably true based upon their failure to govern in Gaza, right? Not a single Jew there, not a single Israeli soldier there for 15 years until now, until the war. They took billions of dollars that they could have used to build hotels or schools or hospitals, and they used it to build terror tunnels and weapons of mass destruction. So let's just assume, if the debate is, some people might not agree, but I think it's proven that the Palestinians can self-govern. They also have essentially full autonomy over 40% of the West Bank. That's also become a terror hotbed, and 80+% of the Arabs living in the West Bank supported what Hamas did. So if you say that the Palestinians can't have a state, and I completely believe that, I believed it before, but certainly now post October 7th, I think it's demonstrably true. So who fills the vacuum? And my argument is, number one, if you're just looking at resumes of all the neighbors, you would say that Israel is the only qualified country. It's a democracy, and it's a successful democracy. The second thing is that Israel, 20% of Israel is already Arab, right? And that 20% of the population constitutes more than 20% of the elite universities. If you have to go to an emergency room in most Israeli hospitals, more than 50% chance you'll be treated by an Arab doctor. A dear friend of mine was the former chairman of Bank Leumi, Arab Muslim, biggest bank in Israel. There's just lots of evidence that Israel knows how to empower an Arab minority. And that's the only value I think that can be exported into the West Bank to create a safer and more prosperous area. Now, look, you got to thread some needles. You got to deal with the demographics. You got to deal with the governance. I mean, I talk about one example that, not everybody has to vote the same way. I mean, the truth is that in our country, we own Puerto Rico. It's an American territory. The people there are citizens, but they don't vote in our national elections. The American system of government, look, I think we all know whoever wins the popular vote in this election is probably not going to be the president of the United States, because of the system that we have for elections. So look, I have some ideas about how to thread that needle, but it's a detail. I mean, if people want to do this, we'll create a way to empower the Palestinian population in the West Bank without creating the risk that Israel ceases to become a Jewish state, because now half the population is Arab. So there's ways to do it, and I wouldn't apologize for it or make excuses for it. But look, Israel is there anyway right now with the sticks, if you will. Israel is there in Jenin, in Tulkarm. Every day in the news, there's evidence right now of Israel going into these areas that are supposed to be governed by the Palestinians because they're hotbeds of terrorism. But all that Israel has to offer these people right now is a military force. If Israel takes over and takes responsibility for the human dignity of every human being living in that area, they'll do a much better job than anybody else. It's a big lift. They'll have to get help. To me, it's the future of the Abraham Accords to try to get help from the wealthy Gulf nations in doing this. But to me, it is the convergence of God's will and politics and economics and security and human rights. It converges, I think, all at the same place.
And yet you have this conversation in the West that views what you just laid out as delusion and psychotic, not just in the West, and I think large precincts of the American Jewish community would view what you just said as crazy. They would say, you can't have dominion over the West Bank. There are too many. It's unjust. You just used the example of Puerto Rico to say you could have a non-sovereign but free people in the West Bank who can vote on all kinds of things and local administrations and all of that, would not participate in the national elections. And that is a thing in the United States. We have Guam, we have Puerto Rico, we have American Samoa. We just saw them really cutesily participating in the roll call of the states at the Democratic convention, and so they can be part of that, but we do not. And the District of Columbia, of course,
Yep.
whose voters vote in the presidential election but do not have senators or a congressman. But you still, if you said that today if you were sitting across from Kamala Harris and you said what you just said to me, she would say you are suppressing legitimate rights of a stateless people who deserve a state just like Israel deserves a state. We need a deal. Hamas must be destroyed, all of that. And then when that happens, then there'll be a two-state solution. And that's the way to go forward. So how, aside from, you have written an entire book to explain why that view is fallacious. So I'm going to give you, 90 seconds
Yep.
to make the argument that you make in hundreds of pages. But what do you say to Kamala Harris after that bizarre thing where she says, we need a deal, Israel needs to be defended, too many Palestinians have died, and when we make this deal, at the end of it, there will be a two-state solution?
First of all, there's a Palestinian state already. It's called Jordan. It's 60% Palestinian. It's not run by Palestinians. It's run by some fictitious monarchy, and nobody seems to care. There's a Palestinian state in Gaza. They blew it. There's a Palestinian state in Area A in the West Bank. They blew it. My answer to her is, you know what? I'm tired of making excuses for the fact that the Jewish people are entitled to one Jewish state. And that's where the title comes from. Just one Jewish state, not two, not five. It's the size of New Jersey. There's 40 Muslim states. There's 30 or so Christian, Hindu, and Buddhist states. Nobody seems to care. Okay. The Jewish people have the greatest title to their territory than any people anywhere in the world. They have a title that goes back thousands of years. And I'm just tired of making excuses for it. We're not going to see Bethel. Give you an example. Bethel, where God, where Jacob had a dream, and God promised Jacob that he would become the father of a great nation in this land. We're not going to watch a video where bloodthirsty, Palestinians destroy it, burn it, tear it apart because all they want to do is destroy the connection of the Jewish people to the land of Israel. We're at the, October 7th, I think, has taken some of the Jewish people, not all of us, but it's taken some of us to the point where, the idea of defending our right to exist, never again. No more defense. We're here. We exist. We're going to be on this land for the next 1,000 years, with God's help. And you want to threaten. You want to make up. You want to talk about apartheid, colonizing, whatever. It's just not true. Everyone knows it's not true. And by the way, the Palestinian people who have been disserved, defrauded by their leaders since Yasser Arafat, they don't want to be governed by Palestinians any more than the Israelis want the Palestinians to govern, because they have no history of self-governance. They've got no institutions of self-governance, nothing but corruption and the suppression of human rights. If that's what Kamala Harris wants, she's not going to get it.
I'm wondering, I'm wondering if most of the arguments on this sort of thing are with the left. But I'm wondering in writing this book and talking to people and in now talking about the book post-publication, what is the situation like with trying to convince people on the right of this sort of thing also, right? Because Benjamin Netanyahu's standard line is, we don't want to rule the Palestinians. So that sort of become the right's way of dealing with, of saying they don't want this conflict to go on forever, and they do want some sort of official separation, whatever. So what is it like talking to people on the right about this? Are they open to the idea, but are tired of having the argument, or are they really opposed to it? And do they really believe that it would entail ruling the Palestinians?
So the right, Seth, I think, has been incredibly supportive. But what I've told them is, it takes me back to a meeting I had with President Trump back in, the end of 2020, when we were talking about a partial sovereignty just over sections of the West Bank. And he said, well, what's going to happen to the rest of it? And he said, well, Palestinians will figure that out. And he said, they're not going to figure it out. They're going to continue. And what you're doing is you're creating Gaza on the West Bank, which is a much more dangerous situation. And I think that most people on the right, including, and I think Bibi has done this as well. Look, I think because this issue is so far off in the distance, because I think no one thinks it's getting resolved, you say what you want to say to move on. I don't want to rule over the Palestinians. We just want our land. And you move on. And it kind of ends the discussion. Because if you say, I want to rule over the Palestinians, it becomes a point of real contention. But at the end of the day, somebody has to rule over the Palestinians. It's either going to be Israel or it's going to be the Palestinians, right? And the Palestinians don't want to be ruled by the Palestinians, by and large. Hard for them to say it publicly, but they don't want to because these are terrible rulers. These are terrible leaders. I mean, not just in terms of how they treat the Jews, paying terrorists to kill Jews, but they're terrible to their own people. And I've seen it. And really, they have no freedom of speech. You talk against Abbas, you get thrown in jail. No one sees you again. So it's awfully difficult. But as between, let's say, a number of bad choices, I don't think this is a bad choice. But if you had to pick the least worst alternative is certainly for Israel to take control of this entire territory.
I want to find. Go ahead. Sorry.
A sort of add-on to Seth's question, which is, I know your argument involves some of the Abraham Accord countries as well. As you said, this is sort of a full extension of the Abraham Accord countries. What's their sense of this, or have you had the opportunity to get there? So because there's a lot of talk about, well, in someday after the war, those countries should come in and administer Gaza and wholesale. But what's the sort of the Emiratis and so on? How do they seem to you? How do they take this argument?
Well, look, the conversations that I've had with them have been very, very high level and not really designed to provoke a serious discussion. They know, look, everybody in the region knows who the Palestinians are, knows what they're capable of doing, knows what they're not capable of doing. None of these countries want to publicly betray the Palestinian cause, get up and say the Palestinians can't have a state. The two-state solution is an easy way to kind of move on to the next subject and say, look, we're not ready for it now, but aspirationally they should have a state. Here's the problem with it from my perspective. The more you keep talking about a two-state solution, you keep raising expectations. You keep managing those expectations. You tell the Israelis, don't live here, don't move there, because you got to preserve a two-state solution, which is entirely theoretical. And then, of course, the money that you give to the Palestinians to fund this, to keep them quiet, it runs out because they stick the money in their pocket or they use it to buy weapons. And then there's friction. And then, the expectations for a two-state solution are dashed. We go back to the beginning again in this cycle of, kind of Charlie Brown and the football. And I just think we got to wean ourselves off it. It's never going to work. It's never going to happen. My view about the Gulf countries is as follows. They are looking for an elegant solution where they can say, we fulfilled our obligations to the Palestinians. Now, if that is in the form of better roads, better hospitals, factories, a means by which they can trade and raise up their standard of living. If America is with it, I think we can get them there. What we can't do, see, if you look at the Saudis right now are pushing for a two-state solution in their discussions with America on normalization. Why? They can't be less pro-Palestinian than America, right? And the Americans are pushing for a two-state solution. So how can the Saudis not be in favor of it? And in fairness, the King of Saudi Arabia, that's the old school view. I think MBS is I don't want to speak for him, but I think he's open-minded and understands the risks of a Palestinian state for everybody. So look, again, we're not going to have one Jewish state, in 2025. But my view is, every day that we talk about a two-state solution, we're just kicking the can down the road and bringing upon everybody greater misery. If we can change the discussion and the trajectory of this region, I think we actually have a chance for far better outcome.
David Friedman, author of One Jewish State, and in just 2 months, a roaster of Natan Sharansky at the Commentary 2024 Roast of Natan Sharansky, where you can hear him try to labor to think of something amusing to say about somebody that we can only celebrate. Who knows where it's going to come out? It's a mystery. It's a wonder. But he will be there, and you should buy his book, One Jewish State, from Humanix Books. David, thank you so much for being here, and see you soon.
John. Thanks, guys. Enjoyed the conversation.
So I watched Donald Trump last night on the Sean Hannity show, doing a town hall on the day that he expected there would be a debate with Joe Biden. or he wanted a debate or whatever it was. And I think people know that over the last month, I've been extraordinarily critical of Trump's performing skills, that he seemed to me to be off, that he wasn't making points sharply, that he was getting distracted and seemed just not to be on his game, while the Democrats seemed to be like upping their game exponentially almost day by day. And this was the first time in my observation of him since the assassination attempt that it seemed to me that he was back to whatever that means, that he was sharp, he was crisp, he was answering Hannity's admittedly sycophantic and sort of almost nauseatingly, boot-licking questions, but nonetheless engaging with the questions, saying something pithy and punchy and stopping, and then letting Hannity ask another question instead of, soapboxing. And that I thought, well, if this guy is the guy who shows up between now and 61 days from now or 60 days from now, this is a very tough race for Kamala Harris. Anybody else get a chance to see or read about it? Because as my friend Mark Halperin told me this morning, it's like I seem to be the only person, given the nature of social media, I seem to be the only person who watched it. Because like there was almost no response from the main. It's like nobody watched it or nobody was paying attention to what he was up to.
Well, I didn't watch it, but having read about it and having heard about it from you, John, it strikes me that the town hall with Hannity was very similar to some of these other interviews that Trump has been doing on non-traditional media, primarily YouTube shows and podcasts, whether it's with Theo Vaughn or Bryson DeChambeau,
Lex Friedman
just now. Of course, he had the conversation with Elon Musk a couple weeks ago. And what struck me about all of these appearances is that Trump is pretty relaxed. He can be frank. He can be revealing. He shows other parts of his personality that are slightly different than the character he plays at the rallies, the tough guy character. So it seems to me like it's just been another example of a Trump that's been appearing, but not necessarily in this format on this on this established commercial network like Fox News Channel.
I didn't see it, but I also, by the way, I think Mark's comment is interesting because something has changed in that Trump used to have the power to say, "Watch this, watch me when I want you to watch me," and he's no longer the one deciding that, and I think that's an important factor.
It's a good observation that that in fact the desires of the resistance and the anti-Trump left and all of that from 2017 onward, which is don't cover him, don't talk about it, don't look in his eyes, don't let him hypnotize people through the cable. You made this happen. You, CNN and the New York, you're the ones who made this happen. You're the ones who made this guy president, and that you must choke him of oxygen and make it impossible for him to go forward, right? So now there seems to be a bifurcated way in which that is made possible. First of all, this is only on Fox, right? So it's not like it could be covered by other networks simultaneously. This was a Fox show, not a multi-stage event with a lot of other people covering it. But they can cover his woes and cover his tribulations. They will today. Tanya Chutkin's courtroom will hear the question of whether or not Jack Smith's claim that they can proceed with the January 6th case, despite the Supreme Court ruling about immunity and presidential immunity, can go forward. I think we're going to hear a lot about that today. And obviously on September 18th, which is 2 weeks from now, we're going to hear a lot about the courtroom, Judge Merchan's courtroom, and the sentencing of Donald Trump in relation to Alvin Bragg. But what he might have to say on matters of policy, they can kind of black out.
I think it might be hard to do that. I mean, Trump's also giving a speech to the New York Economic Club today, I think he'll get headlines out of that. It's not clear Merchan will sentence him on
Right.
September 18th. He may
But
decide.
all eyes will be on it. That's all I'm saying.
Right. I mean,
Like,
either
yeah.
way, people will attack the judge's decision whether to sentence or whether to delay until after the election. I mean, I think the only sensible response is to delay it until after the election. I mean, people will be voting, by the way, beginning next week. Early ballots go out in North
Delaware.
Carolina. I think North
And
Carolina.
Delaware. Yeah.
So here's where the race stands on September 5th. Harris had one of the best months in American politics ever. Her favorable ratings skyrocketed from being less popular than either Biden or Trump to being more popular than both of them, and essentially a 50-50 rating, whereas, opinions of Trump are fixed and underwater among most Americans. She has assembled largely the Democratic coalition again, though she's not quite doing as well among some of the minority voters that Trump was able to pull away. She's still under 90% among Black voters, which is, eye-opening. And she essentially has made the race a toss-up with, perhaps a slight edge going to her because of the momentum she's enjoyed and the money she's enjoyed and the relentless positive media coverage she's enjoyed. However, I think we're seeing signs that period has coming to an end. And there was some polling out from Economist YouGov yesterday that showed that while Democratic enthusiasm is higher now than it's been since Biden was the candidate, it still has dropped off from the super highs of the convention. We're seeing polls in several states where it's showing that the race is neck and neck. And most concerned for the Harris campaign is that she has not pulled ahead of Trump in Pennsylvania in averages of polls. And they're
actually kind of the opposite. I would say
Right.
that the story in Pennsylvania is that Trump seems to be solidifying. I mean, you can't say solidifying because they could be modeling everybody could be getting the electorate wrong, but he is not losing Pennsylvania. He may not be like pulling away in Pennsylvania. And
Right.
it's still the case that until you show us otherwise, who wins Pennsylvania is going to win
I don't
this
think
election.
anyone's going to pull away with anything. There's a possibility that Harris does so well on the September 10th debate next Tuesday that she pulls away with the race,
Right.
and we have 2008, right? I mean, in the Obama team and which is now running the Harris campaign, they want this to be 2008 again, and with her as the change candidate. And I remember in late September, perhaps early October, when Colin Powell came out and endorsed Obama in 2000. The race was effectively over. We all knew John McCain was going to lose, and it was a question of by how much. I don't know. I don't think that's going to happen this time for a few reasons. Primarily, Harris is just not a very strong candidate, and that came through with the Dana Bash interview. She gave a speech yesterday in New Hampshire. Even the location of the speech is worth commenting on. New Hampshire is a blue state, and why was she there? Shouldn't she be going to Pennsylvania? I mean, she's going to be in Pennsylvania for the next
for
3
a
days.
week. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so I got two things to say about that because I also watched her yesterday in New Hampshire. I will say this: she is a vastly more confident presence on stage. Grant, I haven't watched her give speeches through the presidency. I haven't been on C-SPAN finding her talking to the National Dress Manufacturers Association or whatever the hell she might have been doing in 2022. But clearly, the last month has ballasted her self-confidence. The crowds are worshipful. She's getting energized by them. She is having a certain amount of fun, as who wouldn't, basking in the adulation of some very carefully selected people in your audience. So there is that. I'm not saying it's joy, but she's not a drag to watch, which is not nothing. But I want to talk about the substance of what she was talking about, because it was a speech about small business and helping small business. And she said, we're going to give you loans and we're going to do this. And Trumpism, which is, by the way, preposterous. I don't know what she's referring to when she says that they're going to provide tax breaks for small businesses that Trump is going to take away. Trump's administration was actually very focused on small business. His friend Linda McMahon ran the Small Business Administration. There was a lot of stuff in the tax bill relating to giving certain benefits to small business. So I don't know maybe there's something in Project 2025 she didn't like.
Well, no, but she's proposing tax expenditures. She's not proposing tax cuts. This is all
both.
misdirection.
But
She's saying that Trump's going to take away. She means this tax expenditure proposal, which is a spending proposal that Trump has not embraced. I think that's what she's referring to.
Okay. Well, again, it's playing very fast and loose with language, since what she is describing him taking away doesn't exist now, so therefore it can't be taken away. But there were two. So she was talking about that we'll do this. You can take $50,000 in a tax break. Maybe we can try to find a way to give you a low interest loan, which is again, there is a Small Business Administration that exists that does that now. Fine. Then she said, look, billionaires need to pay their fair share. Corporations need to pay taxes. We're here to help small business. So if you make $1 million a year in a small business, your capital gains will be taxed at 28%, she said. And the coverage of this is, oh my God, she has now separated herself from Biden, because Biden's proposal is for a 39% corporate capital gains tax rate on $1 million or more, which is the number that existed in some fashion or other. It's all very complicated, but this 2017 tax cut is sunsetting at the end of next year. And so the big question that even hasn't really been engaged is these two campaigns, when they elucidate tax policy, they're actually talking about something that is going to happen next year, which is there's going to have to either the tax rates that exist now will have to be continued with a vote by Congress saying we're just going to stick with what we have, or we're going to have an entirely new set of American taxes that will have to be drafted category by category, bracket by bracket, all of that. This is sort of like the hidden issue of the campaign, that there's going to be an entirely new tax system in the United States at the beginning of 2026 if policy changes. So she says 28%, and Biden's position was, let's go back to 39%. So my God, it's a tax cut. She's advocating a tax cut. No, because the current corporate capital gains tax rate is 20%. She is advocating an increase in the capital gains tax rate of nearly 50%. And she is trying to gull the press and people into thinking that she is a supporter of a capital gains tax cut.
And the 28% does not include the 5% surcharge that you will have to pay. So in fact, the rate that she's advocating for is 33%. So it's an even higher tax increase.
It's just lower than Biden's rate.
And this is why I get really angry at her speeches. Moreover, she has not specified whether she is continuing or abandoning Biden's proposal of taxing unrealized capital gains. This is the hidden issue in this election. Right now, you are only taxed on a capital gain when you sell it, which makes sense because that's when the gain is real. Otherwise, you may have noticed stocks rise and fall every day, and that means the value of your portfolio rises and falls every day. And what the Biden wants to do, if he's and the Democrats write the tax bill next year, is he wants to institute a tax on unrealized capital gains for people above a certain income threshold, so that at the end of the tax year, if you have your net worth increase because of capital gains, you would have to pay a tax on them even if you haven't sold them. Right. Which means you might have to take a loan to pay for a capital gains that you haven't realized. The economic idiocy of this policy is astounding. And Harris, in the speech, didn't say whether she's going to continue with it or not.
That's an important point, and right now is a very, very good time to talk about this very point, because obviously there'll be some kind of you have to make $2 million a year or something like that. They're not going to do it to.
I think it's over 1 million.
Or,
I think
the
increase,
1 million.
the surcharge and the increase she's talking about on cap gains is for people who make an income over $1 million.
So the unrealized capital gain question comes up at a time when the stock market has had this pretty astounding run up this year, right? I mean, it's up 22%, something like that in aggregate. Let's say that continues to the end of the year and doesn't crash or doesn't correct itself. So so imagine that you are somebody with not a lot of, let's say, income, but you got a big, huge 401k, or you've been just throwing money in forever, and it's worth $2 million, and then suddenly you're going to have to pay tax on the fact that the stock market went up. That's it. You're paying a tax on the fact that the stock market, that the Dow Jones Industrial Average rose. It's collecting money that
popping.
You didn't earn. The government is going to take money away from you that you did not, in fact, earn. Which, of course, means the logical consequences of where this will land, even if it becomes it's so crazy you can't imagine it becoming law. Nonetheless, the logical thought consequences of this are an epic economic crash, a total rebalancing of where Americans keep. It means money
it would make
under
no
the mattress.
sense to invest. I mean, what's the
in
point?
anything ever? In anything.
So why can't she just say? Why can't she just
account.
say explicitly? You know what? Here's how I'm separating from Biden. If the whole strategy is to distinguish herself from Biden, maybe this would be a good place to say, I'm distinguishing myself from Biden by dropping the tax on unrealized capital gains. A couple other issues. Washington Post had an article the other day pointing out that Harris, among the great Etch-a-Sketch moment where she's changing her policies from 2020, has not said whether she has reversed her policy in support of reparations for slavery. Here's another issue that is a political poison. 70-30 of the American public are against reparations for slavery. And why is she being coy about it?
Well, most of the things that she no longer believes, she's not the one who reversed her position anyway, right? I mean, most of this is being done through spokespeople. Like I think we've actually given her too much credit for a swerve to the center, because all we've really heard is like, I got an email from, an unnamed spokesperson saying she no longer supports, a universal mandatory gun buyback program or something like that. But she's never submitted to those specific questions in an interview. The interview was, you've changed your positions a lot. Tell me why. It hasn't been, hey, what do you actually believe?
Here's a great example. The fracking ban. This is a question Dana Bash did ask her. And she said, my position on fracking is the same as it was in the debate in 2020. Since 2020, I have held the position not to ban fracking.
Which certainly everybody remembers, by the way.
As Ramesh Ponnuru pointed out that night, if you go back to what Harris said in the 2020 debate with Mike Pence, she said, Joe Biden is not going to ban fracking. She didn't say, I'm not going to ban fracking. She didn't disavow. She said Joe Biden. So she still apparently agrees with the idea that Joe Biden is not going to ban fracking. Unfortunately, Joe Biden.
Do I.
Yeah,
So
Joe
do I.
Biden has only 4 months left in his non-presidency. So
And see, she was
He
right.
can't spell fracking.
And never again will Joe Biden ban fracking if
That's
you
right.
elect Kamala Harris.
Yeah, absolutely. So I do think that this whole question of holding her to account for the positions that she's going to take is the hidden mystery of the next 2 months. And where I think, and Nate Silver is kind of making this point here and there, though he hasn't systematically made it. So the balloon has risen, as you described. Like she's a hot air balloon. She went up, and she's gotten where she's gotten, and like you can't gainsay it. It's been a remarkable political performance. Whoever gets credit for it, whether she gets credit for it, or the entire Democratic Party gets, or David Plouffe and the new team get credit for it, or the Biden team that's still there that was simply being held back by the horrible nature of the candidate they had to work with. She has put the Democratic Party, put herself in contention, at least jump ball, maybe with a tiny advantage.
I also think
But there are two, but I'm just saying there are 2 months. Yeah.
Other strategic thing she's doing in those 2 months, what she wants to do in those 2 months has sort of become clearer lately, hasn't it? Which is she wants Trump to lose the election for himself. She doesn't feel like she can win it. And she's given hints of this by her incessant argumentation over the rules of the one debate that she's going to participate in. She wants the mics to be on as much as possible. If the mics are not on when it's not the candidate's turn to speak, she at least wants crosstalk to be on the mic. And what counts as crosstalk is going to be something she's going to negotiate. This is like negotiating peace in the Middle East now. And she also wants reporters to hear in the spin room and in the media room to be able to hear that which is muted to the audience. This is a level of granularity that I think is going over people's heads. But the reason for it is because she does not have confidence that she herself can put this election away with what she says and her own performances. What she wants is for Trump to do something that will get him bad press and him own the moment as the villain, and for reporters to have stuff to write about how bad Trump is. And maybe she wants a "excuse me, I'm speaking" moment, which is, what I call a t-shirt moment. It's like when Mitch McConnell said "nevertheless she persisted" about Elizabeth Warren, and like women started getting that tattooed on their arms or something. There's this, she wants all of those manufactured moments, and she wants Trump to lose this election for himself. She doesn't think she can win.
Well, okay, so let's talk about that, because obviously that's a perfectly decent strategy. Like, you want your opponent to, better for you if your opponent blows up on the launching pad than that you have to shoot the opponent down or get to the moon, right? That's the easiest or the most rational of strategies. But it's also rational to look at the issue set. It's still the case, if you look at the issue set, she's doing better on issues than Biden was. Would be hard to do as bad on issues as Biden was over the course of the summer. But she is still on at least 2 major issues, and I think a third, which that hasn't really been gotten to the heart of, right? On the economy, on the border, or on immigration in general. She is still underwater by double digits. Now, she's not underwater by 20 points, which Biden was, but she's underwater. And I'm not sure, despite the fact that she wants to pretend that she's cutting taxes that she's actually advocating raising, I don't know how she gets to par with Trump on those issues. It's very hard to see what argument she can make, what policies she can adopt, or anything like that can get that back for her. The third, which is weirder or harder to kind of calculate, is the strength versus weakness issue. And obviously, if strong versus weak is where you want to go, he's going to look stronger and she's going to look weaker, because what he is strong. So I think her way of wanting him to defeat is that she wants to make him look weak. And or weaken him so that his strength argument is weakened. And this is something that Halperin says in his newsletter this morning, which is their strategy is to portray him as an out-of-touch old buffoon, not a threat to democracy, not the most dangerous person who has ever lived, but a 78-year-old blabbermouth who is obsessed with his own little obsessions and doesn't care about you and doesn't care about the people and is pretty silly and can't stop talking. And I don't know. I mean, as I say, last night, I got a glimpse of a Trump that she's going to have trouble doing that with. But I don't know how she's... Yeah, go ahead.
I want to add another problem. Biden is still president. And Biden is actually out on the stump today. Harris is going to Pittsburgh, where she's going to be until the debate, but she has no events announced. Biden is going to be in public. Biden is still saying that Bibi isn't doing enough to get a ceasefire. Biden's son, Hunter, is going on trial for tax evasion. Starting today. Now, look, Democrats, again, they're relieved. Biden is not the candidate, but he is still the president. And Harris, she can try to distinguish herself in this weird way by only calling for an increase in the capital gains rate to 28% instead of the 45% plus surcharge. But it's hard. It's hard for her. I remember, I'm going to have a Weekly Standard deep cut here. One of my favorite Weekly Standard covers ever came from the autumn of 2000, Bush v. Gore, and the cover was images of Bush and Gore with the caption, "Just the two of us," except they both were being bear hugged by Bill Clinton. And that's a fantastic visual representation of when you're running as the incumbent vice president, you still have the shadow of the current president over you. And this is the case worldwide. Incumbent parties are not doing very well.
Right.
Well,
they are still the incumbent, and it's all an illusion that they're trying to project that they are the change agent. And so far, John, you're right. It has worked pretty well, but can it work for another 61 days?
Well, I think one way that she is trying to distance herself from Biden is just by and this has taken some interesting turns, is by reinforcing Harris Walls. I'm part of this twosome now.
I have a new.
I'm showing up to. What's that?
It's my new boyfriend.
It's my new boyfriend. Yeah.
Meet my new boyfriend.
But don't you think that pick has just been a disaster, though?
Totally.
I mean, I know that he has favorable ratings that are higher than Vance, but I mean, look, if this election is going to be decided in two states, Pennsylvania and Georgia, and as we've pointed out, she is not pulling away from it in Pennsylvania. If she loses Pennsylvania, she will have lost her campaign on the day she selected Tim Walz.
Our friend Josh Kraushar, the editor of Jewish Insider, but like a veteran inside Washington reporter, said he has been hearing grumblings for the last couple of days from inside the Harris campaign and others that they can't believe that she didn't pick Shapiro now, looking at the order of battle. And, we hear Shapiro made demands she couldn't meet. We have the whole question, the Jewish question and all of that. But the problem with Walz, which may not be, is not any individual issue like the stolen valor stuff or the drunk driving or whatever. The problem with Walz is that there seems to be a kind of pattern where if you're on their campaign, you got to have a little pit in your stomach every day because you don't know if something's going to come up from, his town in Nebraska that thus and such happened. That is a version of like Romney putting the dog on the roof of the car or something like that.
That's the thing about Shapiro, right? Which is that the stuff that scared her, which was all this stuff coming up and the public nature of the arguments about him, did also serve as a vetting. You know, the pro Hamas group in the base.
Yeah.
If there's something else sitting there that's even worse than we've heard about Josh Shapiro, they would have brought it up. So
Yeah.
she could have
Yeah.
moved on at least from that
Yeah.
point and said, okay,
Yeah.
you know, we've got a bit of infighting, but
Yeah.
this vetting has been as thorough as possible.
I mean,
Okay,
what
I'm
is-
gonna. What about? Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
I was going to say, what does Walz get you? He doesn't get you anything. You get to Minnesota, which hasn't. I mean, Minnesota hasn't gone Republican in 50 years. So, I mean, does he get you Georgia?
40, 50 years. That's right. No. He gets you. The whole point about this pick is
He
it's supposed
gets you
to be
not Shapiro. She couldn't
Right.
pick Shapiro because Shapiro's Jewish and pro-Israel. That's why.
right. And the other thing is the whole point about this is that it's the Hippocratic Oath politically like personified, which is first, do no harm. That's all the best that you can expect from a vice presidential candidate is that that person will do you no harm. And then maybe it's a huge benefit if they're mildly helpful. I mean, Matt, you wrote a book about Sarah Palin, and I think you put a lot of data together to suggest that she was modestly helpful to McCain in a loss, but that there is a way of measuring data to say that if she had not been on the ticket, he would have done a bit worse than he did.
I mean,
That's
Palin was outreach to Christian conservatives,
Right.
social conservatives, pro-lifers, and if the pro-life issue, this is the Republican Party of 16 years ago, when the candidate really understood the value of the pro-life vote. But if pro-life was your number one issue, you broke pretty heavily for the Republicans, and
Right.
that's where this vice presidential selection mattered because of Palin's personal story.
Right. But that's about it. Like, as I can think of in the course of unless you're uniting factions of the party, which is what that used to be about, right? Where, you pick George H.W. Bush if you're
I think so.
if you're Reagan.
Right. And for Biden picking Harris, it was pure identity politics. He said he was going to have a female vice presidential nominee. And then when the shortlist came out, it was all women of color.
Yeah.
I think what informed the Harris pick of Walz was, hey, we're making you into the Obama of 2024. What did Obama choose? Kind of an older looking white guy. And it turns out that Walz resembles Biden, not just physically, but also in his
Mendacity.
repeat mendacity. Yes.
Yeah.
His
Right.
total
Right.
dishonesty.
Okay, so I want to. What about just to not to end on a note of crushing morosity, but so there was that pick, right? There was the Walz pick, and then there's the Vance pick, and J.D. Vance said something yesterday that was repulsive and disgusting. And I'm sorry, but I find it. I understand that a lot of Republicans and a lot of conservatives are really angry at Liz Cheney because she endorsed Harris, and she's conservative Republican. She says I have to endorse Harris. I understand that is angering to people. That is not why they're angry at her. They're angry at her because of her position on Trump over the last 4 years, her captaincy of the January 6th hearings, her position that Trump is a threat to the United States, and all of that. And so her endorsement or lack of endorsement of Harris is a political matter of no moment. Will not affect a single vote. Nobody's going to vote for Harris who wasn't going to vote for Harris because Liz Cheney, a congressman from, the upper Northwest who represented 12 people, though she was in the leadership and has a famous father, that's not going to have any effect. J.D. Vance issued this statement in which he said that Liz Cheney was responsible for the deaths of thousands of her children, is what he said. He said thousands of her children because of her advocacy of forever wars and the evil of forever wars and the monstrousness of her father and the neocons and whatever. Now, when I came in, as I recall, J.D. Vance was somebody, though I believe using a different last name at the time, who went into the U.S. military as an adult of his free will to serve in the conflict that he now says Liz Cheney was monstrous for supporting. Which, by the way, her support for the Iraq War has almost nothing to do, Iraq War, not Iraq War, with her political position, as I believe she entered the Congress after her father was vice, right? It was 2012 or something?
I think it was even after that.
Yeah, so I mean, like, she came into the Congress with Barack Obama as president. So this is some bizarre bank shot hit to satisfy those freaks at the Claremont Institute and in the NatCon world and all of that, to play some kind of a forever war game with the, extremists and all of that. And I once thought that he was a serious person. Then I once thought that he was trimming his sails for politics. But accusing somebody of murder for political gain is just beyond the pale. He's a disgrace. It was a disgusting pick. He's behaving in a disgusting fashion, and I just, I don't think that I can sit here and like yell and scream about how awful the Walz pick was without saying something about this.
Well, this is like, as I said last night on Twitter, we were very close to getting, we almost had a vice presidential matchup of, I don't know, Tom Cotton versus Josh Shapiro, and we ended up getting J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, and it's inarguable, I think, that this is a downgrade, in both ways. Although Shapiro was obviously on the precipice of being picked, and we don't know that Cotton was there. I'm not comparing to that extent, but I'm just saying that the choices that these presidential nominees had, they weren't stuck with J.D. Vance and Tim Walz, and it's been kind of frustrating to watch the sort of retrospective, defensive nature of defending those picks when it's like you didn't really have to go down this road at all. You had on a silver platter better choices.
Look, if go back and okay, fine. It's not the recent past. 24 years ago is not the recent past. But 24 years ago, the vice presidential nominees in the United States were Dick Cheney, former defense secretary, White House chief of staff, congressman from Wyoming. Was he whip?
Yeah.
Was he House Majority?
Yeah, he was
House Minority Whip.
Minority Whip.
Minority Whip. And Joe Lieberman, senator from Connecticut, who had the best political debate of my lifetime. Who had the most substantive and best political debate of my lifetime. You can go back to Biden versus Ryan in 2012, which was a fascinating debate between somebody who was trying to play a substantive attack game, that was Ryan, and an old-time Paul who was playing old-time Paul games by going, "Oh, Sonny, you're really cute with all of your malarkey here. I'm going to pat you on the head." Like, Those were actually interesting political moments. God knows what this Walz versus Vance debate is going to be like. One of them is a liar. The other is a mendacious, what would you call him? Like the chameleon. And it's another like moment of kind of political disgrace in the United States.
I'm looking forward to finding out what they disagree on.
Interesting point right there. That is a very good point. And to conclude, I will make a commentary recommends. It's a little tricky, okay? There's a new show on Hulu. It's called The English Teacher. I watched the first episode. I gather the second episode, which is also available, is even better than the first episode. It is about a young gay Hispanic English teacher in the Austin public school. It's not a public school; it's a private school in Austin. Where is it? Okay, anyway, he's a high school English teacher, and it is about navigating the frontiers of woke as a high school English teacher with, and not just woke, but also sort of cultural politics. And there is a moment in it that will be hard for viewers of ours to take, where somebody says something like, I mean, I don't want to. How am I supposed to remain silent with evil conservative parents, evil Republicans who are being evil? And it's very annoying. And I could understand why I'm recommending the show, and that you might want to turn it off in anger when you hit that moment. But the show gets ideologically more complicated as it goes, and it is. I haven't laughed out loud watching a sitcom. This is a weird thing to say, because what is a sitcom? It's a comedy. I haven't laughed out loud watching a sitcom, and I mean, I don't even know how long. And I laughed 4 or 5 times watching this because of the interplay of the students and the teachers, all of whom are navigating every kind of political landmine of the present moment in very, very funny ways. So if you can overcome this one moment, and if you can't, I'm not criticizing you.
I'm afraid, John, I will not be able to overcome that.
Same
And
here.
I will say that we are now entering the best 2-month period of American sports, with the NFL beginning this evening, September 5th, as baseball begins its pennant race into the playoffs and the World Series. And then later in October, hockey and the NBA also start up. So basically, I won't be able to make any commentary recommendations for the next 8 weeks, because all of my free time will be spent watching professional sports.
Well, what about? Can't you recommend should Francisco Lindor or Shohei Ohtani be the MVP? You could.
I can. Yes, I will. Okay. Well, then maybe that's what we'll do. We're always, the idea of the commentary recommends is living. It's organic. That's so. Why not? Why not? I can make sports recommendations. I would like to recommend that the American League pitchers stop throwing balls 10 feet away from Aaron Judge's bat. Yes.
So he needs to maybe get to 61.
Make a record. Yeah, exactly.
I understand you don't want to pitch to the guy, but you're basically throwing to first base in order to avoid getting his bat anywhere near your ball. And it's getting a little ridiculous.
There is a wonderful, and Sports Illustrated once did the oral history of, it's an article, not a book, the oral history of Buck Showalter ordering his pitcher to intentionally walk Barry Bonds with the bases loaded. Is a very famous moment where Buck Showalter, the mad scientist of a manager, has his team walk in a run rather than pitch to Barry Bonds. So if there's getting close,
last week or the week before last, Aaron Judge hit 7 homers in 9 games. Yeah. And it's now literally the case that he's standing there and they're like, just walk. We'll just walk you. I don't know what to do. You've broken us. You've broken us. Anyway, whatever. So that is so I'm recommending something that neither Abe nor Matt. We already have. We have a pre-disrecommends and they haven't even watched it. But
instant
that's my
feedback.
Recommendation. Because I am capacious. You're
a cultured person.
We're watching the Needles. It's like during the debate when Frank Luntz has the
focus
Needles and watches them move.
Yeah. What is that thing? It's a handle, right? They hold a joystick and they move. They pull it back and forth to show whether they like something or dislike something. All right. Well, it was great to have David Friedman on again. Commentary Roast, 17th of November. Go to commentary.org/roast for information on how to attend. We'll be back tomorrow for Matt, Seth, and Abe. I'm John Podhoretz. Keep the candle burning.